Right, okay. Joe Barton just tweeted that you're a very, 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 very hard audience. But I think he was trying to make me nervous. I specifically want to talk about mental health and mental illness. I've been asked actually to come here quite a lot over the years, and I've always resisted, partly because I'm a bit chippy, and I went to Cambridge, and I didn't like Cambridge much, so I don't really like the whole Oxbridge thing much. So insofar as I go out to schools and colleges, I tend to go to comprehensive schools and sixth form colleges and all the rest of it. But when Paulina, she's obviously, people that do what she does, they get very, very good at finding an angle. So she said, what about if you came and just talked about mental health? And I don't know if you know, but I'm an ambassador for a campaign called Time to Change. And Time to Change, it's a really, really interesting campaign because it's not about services, it's not about therapy, it's none of that. It's totally about trying to change the way that people think. And in a way, that's what I guess that was my kind of background in journalism and also in politics, working for the Labour Party and for the government. And the thing about something like you guys as students, I sort of feel that with mental health and mental illness, that it's, if you think of all the great campaigns, okay, women's rights, gay rights, racial equality, they've all required long, slow processes of change. And then the change has kind of come, and it's come actually fairly quickly. But the point is that change, you never quite know when change is happening. And I just think that one of the reasons for me to come somewhere like this is because, you know, whether I like it or I don't, Oxbridge is Oxbridge, and you've got some of the best brains in the country here. Not just the best brains today, but the best brains in the future. And I guess I just want you to at least think about getting involved in changing the way that people think about this and about lots of other things as well. But specifically, I want to focus on this today. When I talk about the way that change happens, I don't know how many people have seen the film Milk. Anybody seen the film Milk? About Harvey Milk, the gay rights campaigner? It's a really, really interesting film because if you, hands up here, anybody who's actually ever been involved in a campaign. That's quite a lot, okay? And is that a campaign? Is that a political campaign? Is it a social campaign? Is it a personal? Presumably, did you have to campaign to get this position? Ish? Oh, I see. You sort of just press ganged. Okay, I won't ask. But the point about that film is that you can't tell where the change comes. So the film starts, and Harvey Milk is going out with his fellow gay friends, and they're getting beaten up in the streets, because that's what happens in that era in California if guys go out dressed a bit brightly and not walking like real men are meant to walk, okay? That's how the film starts. It ends with him elected in Congress, and he's just passed the first piece of kind of gay rights legislation in the States, and he's a bit of a hero, okay? My point is you cannot tell on that arc from the start of the film to the end when the change came, because the change didn't come with this passing of legislation. I'd been involved in government, and I've seen lots of different things that have been legislated for. They don't come with the legislation. The legislation is usually a response to the change. And I know that, I guess particularly without, I don't want to sound patronising, but younger people, I think there is this sense that of people feeling you can't make a difference, actually it doesn't matter, there's no point getting involved in these things because nothing ever changes. And I find it the weirdest thing to say, because I think the world's changing at the moment faster than it's ever changed. What I think it means is that people don't feel that sense of that change relating to what we, my generation, would define as normal politics. But actually, your generation is changing the very nature of politics and political debate. And so understand that what you see if any of you do watch the news, if any of you do watch telly or Prime Minister's questions and all that stuff in Parliament and the rest of it, I can see why people would look at that and think, what has that got to do with me? But actually, it's fundamental, because it's part of this bigger process of change that's going on all the time. And I just think we underestimate, and to be honest, one of the reasons I didn't like Cambridge is because I wasted it. And I underestimated the extent to which if I did 4 years because I had a year abroad, 4 years, that actually you've got so much that you can do if you decide to get engaged, you decide to get interested, and you can make change. So don't let anybody ever tell you that you can't make change, because you can. Now, the change that I want to make at the moment in relation to this campaign, and I think it's great you've got your own campaign here, but the reason I want to make the change is because I think this is actually the last big taboo. I think it's the last big area of discrimination. Gay rights has moved on incredibly. Racial equality, there is still racism. There's still racism in lots of different parts of the world, but the racists are on the back foot. I can remember not that long ago, some of you may know I follow a football team that's about to be promoted to the Premier League called Burnley. Queen's Park Rangers, Joey Barton's team, are fading away. And my whole sort of thing about why I get involved in football and all the rest of it is because I believe in a sense of belonging and community and all the rest of it. Now, we will look back, I think, one day, and we'll think, when I was at a football match about 30 odd years ago. We were playing a team, all our players were white, they had a couple of black players. And some of our fans were throwing bananas on the pitch, okay? Now I actually felt sick, I felt physically ill, okay? And they were doing all these monkey noises and all the rest of it. I felt physically ill. Now I'm quite robust, okay? I don't mind argument, confrontation and all the rest of it, I can cope with it. I couldn't engage on that, because actually the centre of gravity, where the feelings were in that crowd at that time, were with the guys who were throwing the bananas. Now, you just think about it today. If you guys went to a football match now, you probably think I'm describing a different world. But that was the world that I was living in, and I was in my 20s. Now that's changed. Now, if somebody did that, one, they'd be arrested. Two, there'd be absolute opprobrium in the area in which they did it. For those reasons, they probably won't do it. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't racists out there, but they're on the back foot. And again, where did that change come from? How could we live in a world like that, and now we live in a world that's, thank God, completely different to that? The change came because people decided to make the change. Change only comes, I think, if people decide to make change. We know that in our own lives. And we know that as well with the way that issues change. Now, if we're not careful, this is why it's so important not to just sort of withdraw from the political process. If we're not careful and people give up on democratic politics, two things happen. One, you don't get good people going into politics. Not a good thing. Secondly, the non-democracies, and this is happening at the moment, I think. If you look at the countries that are sort of look like they're doing a bit better, they're the ones, you know, we're still arguing about whether we can have a third runway at Heathrow. I can remember the first discussion on that I heard was in 1998. Meanwhile, the Chinese have been sort of building an airport every second week, and a couple of nuclear power stations, and they don't have to worry about all the planning and all the rest of it. Or, you know, Putin, he'd call himself a Democrat. Well, so these countries, the countries in the Gulf, they're all, you know, they would say they're doing better than us. Now, I'm not arguing against democracy. I'm simply saying don't withdraw from democracy because we feel that it's kind of going through this very, very difficult phase. So the political process is very, very important to making change, but so are people's attitudes. I mean, Paulina was just telling me that, you know, Joey, when he was here, was talking about the whole kind of impact on his life of social media. And I feel very much the same. I feel that social media is... So I was at a thing in the Gulf the other day, and this guy I love these people, he calls himself a futurologist. But actually, you know, he did have some interesting things to say. And one of the things he said was, when we're looking at social media, we're on page... if this is a 60-minute film, we're in minute 3. Now, if you think about how the change is happening already, this is why it just kind of drives me crazy when people say nothing ever changes. Somebody said to me the other day, said, you must have loved Twitter when you were in Downing Street because of the way you kind of, like argument and all the rest of it. I was able to say, Twitter didn't exist when I left Downing Street, let alone when I started. YouTube, I read the other day, more video content is uploaded to YouTube every single month than the three main American networks broadcast in the first 60 years of their existence. It's a totally different world. And that's the world that, in a sense, we are in and creating. And I just think that when you're trying to change attitudes, that's an incredibly useful resource. Because what it means is, when I was working for Tony Blair in the Labour opposition and then in government, back in the mid-90s, command and control communications, it was possible. We basically, we had the strategic framework, we set the message, and then we just did what we did, okay? And the reason we got a reputation for being control freaks is because we control the message. And that was the only way to communicate in that time with a hostile media, a difficult opposition, and all the rest of it. Now, there's no such thing as the agenda. It's kind of just out there all the time. Even when something really, really, really big and important happens. Let's say when Barack Obama announced that bin Laden had been killed. Now, how many people saw him do that live? That was a massive event, but hardly anybody would have actually seen him announce that. We all knew about it by the end of the day. We'd all have a view of it. Since then, millions of words have been written. There have been feature films, there'll be films and drama way into the future. The single most important piece of communication, if you like, one was the fact of what happened, and the second was the way that Obama announced that and projected that. You can no longer control, if you like, where the message goes. You can only control what you say and what you do. And I think that's just a better way than the one that we dealt with and the one that we had to adapt to and so forth. So, in a way, your generation can actually, as individuals, I think this is much more democratizing in a way, you can create your own landscape, create your own media landscape, and you can use these tools really genuinely to make change according to things that you believe. So I've mentioned racism, I've mentioned gay rights, I've mentioned what used to happen to people who were gay. It still does, but less than it did. You still get racism, but it's less than it used to be, and hopefully it gets exposed, it gets punished. I just want you to understand, and some of you will know this already, and probably more of you will know this than actually want to admit it. Because let me tell you, this is how taboo and discrimination works. People feel that they can't be honest about themselves. I heard this absolutely terrible story the other day of a woman with two daughters, and the woman gets really, really bad depression. She's never, ever, ever told her employer that she gets depression. She's regularly on medication. And she doesn't want her employers to know because she's worried that if they know, and if they know that she's on medication, and if they know that sometimes it gets so bad that she can't get out of bed, she's worried that they won't keep her on. And she's on a 3-month contract, rolling contract. So when she gets ill, when she really, really can't face the world, she gets her 12-year-old daughter to phone the work to say that her 9-year-old sister is ill. And she's having to stay off to look after the 9-year-old sister. And her employer is fine with that. She then has to say to the 9-year-old sister, you can't go to school today in case somebody sees you with their parents and they know that I've said you're ill. Now, just think about that. You've got 3 people there who are living a lie. Why are they living that lie? Because we live in a country where people feel they can't say that they have an illness. And a lot of people feel that. I think your generation is much, 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 much better. But it's still not that great. And just be honest, ask yourself, if let's just say one of you had a mental health problem, and say you were applying for a job, and you filled in the form, and let's just say it said, is there anything else you want to tell us? Or let's just say, I don't know whether these days you're allowed to ask specifically about health, but you're certainly allowed to ask about your general state of well-being and so forth. And let's say you were bipolar. let's say that you had OCD. Let's say that you had had an addiction issue. Are you going to say that? Are you going to write that down on an application form? And then ask yourselves, if you'd survived cancer, would you feel more or less comfortable about talking about that? And I think I know the answer to that. You'd feel more comfortable about talking about surviving cancer than you would about having a mental health problem. Now, back in the day when people were throwing bananas on football fields, people used to call cancer the big C. People didn't want to talk about cancer. Now, because people decided to campaign to make change, very rare would be the government that would come along and say, do you know what, we're going to shut that cancer service down. And I know, particularly at the moment with all the kind of, austerity and the cuts and all the rest of it, if you've got a commissioner, somebody in charge of the health service purse strings, and they've got a choice between cutting children's services, cancer services, or mental health services, which you think they instinctively might think about would be an easier target. And that's happening all the time. And that then reinforces the stigma and the discrimination. And I think let me put you all on the spot. Hands up, anybody here who doesn't know somebody who's got a mental health problem. So, either you just don't want to put your hands up, or actually, you're telling the truth. And the truth is, we all know somebody who's got a mental health problem. Every single person in this room, at some point, has or will need medical help for a physical problem. Why, given that the mind is the most complicated part of our being, why is this sort of shock at the idea that sometimes people get mentally ill? And I don't know if you know this, it's in our National Health Service constitution that there should be a parity of treatment and services and esteem, if you like, between physical and mental health. Well, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's there in the words, it's there in legislation, but it doesn't exist. So the reason why I talk about this and the reason why I campaign on this is because I think it's an area where, if we really want to be a civilized society, we've got to understand, we've got to change the way that we think about this. I'll give you something else. Vast numbers of people in Britain, including people who are diagnosed and their families, when they hear that a member of their family is diagnosed, if they're told that they have schizophrenia, you would be amazed how many people think that means they are going to go and kill somebody. Because that is the way that that particular illness is projected. You only read about it, you only hear about it when psycho killer is on the loose. And somebody is let out and says in the court case that they were told by Jesus they had to go and kill. Now, it does happen, okay? Some people, they're ill, that happens, and they kill other people. It doesn't happen very often. There are many, many people who have schizophrenia who can cope, who have a life, who have a family, who have a job. But very rare is the person with schizophrenia who would say in an interview, oh, by the way, I've got schizophrenia. Now, I would like to get to a position where the person with schizophrenia thinks, well, maybe I could say that. Maybe it's no different than saying, as you can see, I'm in a wheelchair. As you can see, all my hair fell out because I'm being treated for cancer. We've got to get to that position where we see mental health in exactly the same way as physical health. Now, why do I kind of care about this and why do I know about this? I care about it because I know a lot of people who get affected, and I know about it because I've had mental health problems. And the reason why I don't mind talking about it is because I genuinely am one of the... Joey Barton might be another, but I'm genuinely somebody who doesn't give a damn what the press says about me. And that's another very, very good attitude to have if you want good mental health, by the way. As some of you will go on to be legends and famous in your own chosen fields. And so I feel that I'm in a very, very privileged position. I've had two quite interesting careers, first in media and then in politics. I've now got a rather odd mix where I kind of do different things, and I write and I speak and I consult and I do charity stuff, but actually I'm in a position where I can pretty much do what I want. And one of the things I want to do is this, because I think it matters, I think it's important, I think it's kind of on the cusp. I sort of feel on that arc that I talk about, I feel it's sort of, we're pushing in the right direction, and eventually it's going to get there. And eventually we're going to say, God, did we really think that if you had bipolar, you couldn't work, you couldn't get a job? Did we really used to think that if you had schizophrenia, that meant you'd probably kill people? Did we really think that it was okay to live in a country where people who are on regular large doses of medication for mental health problems are likely to live 20 years less than other people? Because that's the country that we live in now. And so that's the country that I would like to see us all try and do something to change. Now, here's the thing, some of you will go on to be employers. And in fact, some of you are employers already, but some of you will go on to be employers. And employment is incredibly important in this. It's really important you have stuff like you're doing in the university and students get support and counselling, all that, that's important. But employers are fundamental. They are the ones, I think, who can do the most and who currently probably do the least to actually make this change really kind of kick on. And I was incredibly lucky, because I'll just briefly tell you what happened to me. Joking aside about Cambridge, I drank way too much. I didn't work hard enough. I got a perfectly good degree, God knows how. I then had a kind of year not knowing what I wanted to do. I sort of was messing around. I worked in a casino, I worked in factories, I travelled, I was a busker, did all these kind of crazy stuff. I was drinking and drinking and drinking and drinking. I drifted into journalism. And here's the thing, I was what you call a functioning alcoholic, okay? I was not just able, I was kept being promoted. And the thing about newspapers back then, it's all changed now, but then it was a really drinking culture. In fact, if you didn't drink a lot, people thought you were a bit weird and you wouldn't get promoted. So I was the youngest news editor in Fleet Street on a new newspaper called Today, which is now no more. And so I was 27, 28, working hard, playing hard, drinking very, 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 very heavily. And one day, I mean, I've written 3 novels now. They're all about mental health. And the first one, which is called All in the Mind, there's a scene in there. We're selling these at the end, by the way, to give money to Mind. And there's a scene in there where I describe a psychotic breakdown, okay? Now, in the middle of this particular psychotic breakdown, the guy who's having the psychotic breakdown visits a prostitute, okay? Now, apart from that bit, the rest of it is pretty much what happened to me, okay? I promise, because I was already with Fiona at that time, and I wouldn't do that. And how I describe it, and sometimes I think this is the great thing about writing, is that sometimes I think what I'm doing in writing about it is sort of taking what was the worst thing that ever happened to me and trying to get something good out of it. I'm a great believer, if something bad happens, try and turn it into something good. That's how charity works. Most of the charities that people get involved in, it's because somebody that they know died or something happened that affected them in a particular way. So that's what I do. And when I described this, what was happening, what happened to me is I'd had 3-day absolute terrible bender. I was getting into a state where every single morning I was waking up, waiting for Fiona to go out, throwing up, feeling a bit better, then trying to have an argument with myself, inside myself, when can I first have a drink? Then I'd say 12 o'clock's okay. You get to 10 past 11, you think, wow, it's nearly 12 o'clock, what's half an hour? You start, long lunches, in and out the pub all afternoon, drinking club, phone home, row, slam down the phone, stay in the pub, poor me, had a row, knock it back, can't go home, had a fight, into a hotel, booked into a hotel, emptied the minibar. Not good. Up the next morning, slept in my clothes, get to Heathrow, I'm flying to Scotland, and I was conscious enough to know this isn't good. So you start doing really crazy things. You go into a shop and you say, I want to buy some new clothes. And you say, what those? No, I'll leave those, doesn't matter, you keep those. You start to, I get to Scotland and I'm starting to feel really, really kind of weird now. And I hire a car, God knows how they gave it to me, but they did. I got onto this roundabout and I went round this roundabout 100 times. I could not get off the roundabout. I was going round and round and round and round. And I was saying to myself, and I could hear people honking their horns and all the rest of it. And eventually, now the worst thing about this, I was doing a piece with Neil Kinnock, who was then the leader of the Labour Party. He was visiting Gordon Brown's constituency, which is where the Rosyth Naval Dockyard is, which is where our nuclear weapons are kept. It's not a good place to crack up, honestly. If you're ever going to crack up, don't do it near a top secret naval base. That's where I did it. I parked my car. I realised I couldn't drive. I got a cab, I went on to the next place. And then as the day developed, I realised I'm hearing voices. And it is the most terrifying thing, because you know they're not real, but they feel so real. And then I ended up in this council building in a place called Hamilton. And don't ask me why, but I was absolutely convinced I was being tested for my life. Now I now know I wasn't, okay? But that's what I thought at the time. And as I thought that, I thought, well, what do I need if I'm being tested for my life? We didn't have phones then, but I had cigarettes. Don't need cigarettes, I threw them on the floor. Bits of papers, pens, don't need any of that. And I'm starting to sort of just build this little pile of possessions. I had a bag, don't need a book, don't need that, don't need any of this to survive. And meanwhile, people are walking past me, and they're saying things, okay? And I guess if I saw somebody doing that, I might say something like, "Are you okay?" But whenever anybody said that to me, I would think there was some sort of real deep hidden code in there, and I'm trying to work it out. And then somebody came along and said, "Are you all right?" And I was convinced that was a political question. And I said, no, I'm not. Don't look at me like that. So they would think, oh, okay. Anyway, eventually, I had half an hour of this, and by now, I promise you, you're starting to look a bit worried. You're starting to look like Tony Blair looked when I told him all about this before he hired me, because I did think, here's an interesting thing about employers. I told Tony Blair this story, and when I got to the point of saying, so in my head, I heard bagpipes, a brass band, I had a plate glass window that was smashing, I had this furious row going on with Fiona, I had a row going on in the office, and I'm hearing them all at the same time. And he sort of did his Bambi, he went, okay, like that. He then said, this is after he'd offered me the job and I was saying I wasn't sure. He then said, well, I'm not bothered if you're not bothered. And I said, what if I'm bothered? He said, I'm still not bothered. Now I thought that was I talk about employers, that was an important signal, because there's a guy who was probably going to be the next Prime Minister, and indeed he was. And it was just the same. After my breakdown, so just to finish the story, these two policemen eventually came up to me, plainclothes policemen, and one of them said to me, he didn't say, you okay, he didn't say you're all right, he said, do you think you should come with us? And I looked at him, and this is the first time I had, as it were, surrendered to the idea that maybe I had a problem. I said, do you know what, I think I should. He said, okay, come on. Got in a car, into the police station. I'm now thinking, what the hell is going on? So I'm now in a police station, and now I've lost all my possessions. I don't know where they've gone, but I now decide to take all my clothes off. You know, if ever you see in police stations and cells and all that, you see all the graffiti on the wall and you think, why do they do that? Well, you do it. So I'm scratching stuff on the walls and all the rest of it. I'll never forget this. This policeman came in. This is a sleepy little police station in the middle of West Central Belt in Scotland. And this copper comes in and he says, can I get you anything? Drink? Something like that? I said, I'd like a bottle of your finest champagne, if I may. Anyway, he came back with a can of iron brew. He says, that's all we've got. Anyway, it was fizzy. So they then said, we'll let you go. You haven't committed an offence, but we're not going to let you go unless you agree to go to hospital. So I went to hospital, and I was there for, I don't know how long. And this psychiatrist, in fact, I've written a little book which I haven't got with me. It's called The Happy Depressive, and I've dedicated it to this. No, in fact, I dedicated the first novel to this psychiatrist. And he was the one, without nagging me, who made me realise I had a problem. Now, the thing is, loads and loads and loads and loads of people had said I had a problem. So why didn't I believe them? Because I didn't want to believe them. If you have a mental health problem, an addiction is a mental health problem, it does have to come from within. You have to accept you have a problem. It's the same with anything. It's like, I think as a country at the moment, I think we've got a real problem with alcohol. I mean, I know there's nothing worse than a convert, but I really do think we've got a problem with alcohol. And I just don't think we're facing up to it, because just as individuals have to accept a problem to deal with it, so do countries, and we're not facing up to it. But I've faced up to it, and I was then incredibly lucky, because my former boss at the Mirror, who'd been furious with me when I left and went to Today, he phoned me up. This was the day I got out of hospital. And I was so kind of edgy. I couldn't go, I flew down from Scotland and I got into the Heathrow, and I couldn't face going into London. I just couldn't face it. So I got in a cab and I went to the West Country, stay with some friends. And I just couldn't face going into London and the noise and the bustle and all the rest of it. And I guess going back to failure and all that, and people knowing what had happened or thinking they knew what happened, I was running away from it. And this guy, Richard Stott, he was from Oxford actually, but he was my editor at the Mirror, and he phoned me up, and I'll never forget this. He said, "I hear you've gone mad." Yeah, bit, yeah, I guess. He said, "Well, I'm not going to say I told you so," which of course is a way of saying I told you so. But what I suggest you do is chill out, get yourself well, take the money where you are until you're better, and when you're better, come back here. And that was like, I can't tell you what that did to me. It was like, oh my God, I'm not finished. Because I thought I was completely finished. And so I think within all that, I've sort of gone off the point here, but I'll quite often do that. But I think within it all, if there's two big things I want to say to you, well, three. One is, I went on to do one of the most difficult, challenging, pressurized jobs that you can imagine. I'm not saying that in a boastful way, I'm saying it as a fact. If you're at the interface in the modern age between politics and media, it's a pretty rough place. If you then become the person that this side identifies as the one they really want to go for, it becomes even rougher. And I got through that, and I got through it fine, and I'm very, very glad that I did it. So I've done that. I've written books, I've done all sorts of different stuff. And, you know, when were you born? 92. 92? Okay, so 6 years before you were born, I thought I was dead. I thought I was absolutely finished, and I was never going to do anything with my life. And here I am. Subsequently, I learnt that I probably drank to the excess that I did because I'm a depressive. I get very bad depression. And why I get it, I don't know. I think some people do and some people don't. But now I take medication, I see somebody, I'm aware of it, I think about it, I talk about it, I write about it, and it's better than it was, okay? So that's the first thing. There's a message in there that says you can get through this stuff. The second message is, I think, you turn any setback into an opportunity. Like I say, I campaign on it because I did it. I write about it because it's a way, I think, for me to give some sort of meaning to it. And more importantly, it allows me to join up with other people, hopefully like-minded, but also different people, and say, do you know what? There's one really big campaign that has to be fought and won here, and it can be fought and it can be won. And I think it's important that, you know, we all understand that. Because the fact that not one single person put their hands up when I said, does anybody not know somebody who has a mental health problem, just underlines the extent to which this is around and with us all the time. And we still prefer, as people, as families, as communities, as colleges, as countries, we still prefer to put it in a box over there in the corner and mark it, let's not shake it about too much. Well, I think at your age, your time of life, where you are with your brightness and inquisitiveness and all the rest of it, you should be shaking things up. And I'm asking you to join me and join these guys in shaking this one up, because one day, just as I look back now, and I can see the looks on your faces when I say that people used to throw bananas at black people on football pitches, I want my kids, when they're your age, I want them to look back and think, I really cannot believe that my granddad had to go out and campaign on this stuff, because why did he have to do that? And I'd like you to join that campaign, because one day it'll be won. Thank you.